Welcome, welcome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. I am excited to bring you another edition of the show, but also another wonderful guest. Today's guest is Maury Danielle. Not only is Maury Danielle the founder of Be Free to Fly International, but they are also a coaching, which is a coaching and consulting company, but they are also an advocate, speaker, author, and all of these wonderful things. And so we are super excited to get into their life, their story, their journey, and all the wonderful things that they are going to share today. Tune in.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers. And last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events, who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at msusatexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Fix Global at www.hopeyxglobal.org.
Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome once again, everyone, to another edition of the Miss Texas Show. Your co-host, Melissa Santana, excited as always to bring you another edition of the show, but also another wonderful guest. And so I'm super excited. Today we have I'm like making sure I don't say the name wrong, but Maury Danielle. And she's the founder of Be Free to Fly International. And not only that, because Be Free to Fly International is a coaching and consulting company dedicated to making a life-changing impact on survivors of domestic violence, but she is also a life coach, advocate, speaker, author of Good Mourning, Nude, which is a personal memoir that was published in 2019. She relocated from Los Angeles, California to Houston, Texas to be of service to those in need and build a network in social advocacy environments. Her coaching program uses a step-by-step approach that focuses on mindset, rational, emotive behavioral and cognitive behavioral techniques, emotional intelligence, and overall mental wellness. Her passion is enhancing the overall well-being of clients holistically, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and giving voice to the silent. In addition to life coaching, she has workshops and seminars that have been created for intervention and prevention learning. Her commitment is to share the tools, techniques, and resources with women and families so that they can recover and reclaim their lives and be free to fly, which I love. I love that. So with that, we thank you so much for being with us here today. And I would love for viewers to just get to know the person behind this wonderful organization. So if you could just tell us a little bit about you, your life, your journey, what led you here today, all of those wonderful things.
Well, I think you did it all in the synopsis, but ultimately I am Maury Danielle, and I am everything that you said, the author, speaker, but I think the biggest thing for me is that I am a survivor. And I like to really say that I'm a thriver. I heard that recently, and I really like that because I'm a survivor, but I'm also taking my pain and turning it into purpose. And that's what I've done. And that's really what I do within my company. I am a mother of two beautiful, amazing children. I have Myas, who is 9 years old. He's a boy, he's involved in sports, and he's really, really smart. Young man. And I have a daughter, 24, Amaris, and she is a guru of many things, but she is a recent graduate, college graduate, university graduate. So I'm excited about that. And she's working, my nickname for her is PR Girl. She's public relations and marketing. And so she's doing great things. And I can tell you that my children are thriving because of a choice that I made to be free to fly and to get out of a really toxic and turmoil relationship where I experienced intimate partner abuse, domestic violence, some what is domestic violence, intimate partner abuse, from physical, social, economical, mental, emotional. So it was just a lot. And through my purpose, through my journey, I've discovered my purpose, and I really want to, and I've worked to help others to be free to fly and to rebuild, reclaim, and restore their lives. So that's me in a nutshell.
I love it. No,
Thank
I love that. And of course, as a fellow parent, I'm like, yep, shout out to our kids who have no idea how much they impact our lives. And, you know, like really, exactly, like I know we're tasked with raising them, but there's so much that they teach us that I'm like, exactly.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Absolutely.
Definitely. So I love that. But of course, I'm gonna definitely want to get in more into that, you know, like since I would love to hear more about that side. But I'm definitely curious about the person before the kids came around, before all of that. Like, you know, what was like growing up, you know, before you even had all this, you know, these wonderful contributions that you've given to society, helping to give those wings to others before they had them. What was life like for you before you also, you know, were able to survive all, you know, the different things you have?
Okay. Sure. I was raised in a single parent household. So it was just me and my mom growing up. And I would say, you know, if I had to summarize my upbringing, I grew up in a very spiritual, religious home, but I didn't always recognize, or I was rebellious. I was very rebellious. I'll just put it to you that way. And so I would say, to summarize, I was looking for love in all the wrong places. So I got involved in many things that rebellious teens get involved in. And, you know, ultimately, I just was lost. And I think, you know, being raised in a single parent household, my mom did absolutely the best that she could do. But with working the hours that she worked, I was at home alone. So I had a lot of idle time to myself to get into mischief and things. And I think ultimately, my life choices are what landed me here today, just because I didn't know who I was. Essentially, I lacked guidance, and which is also what fuels my passion to be able to help others, and also the youth as well, and dedicated to helping families, because I know what it's like to not have that guidance or lack that guidance. I was an angry teen. You know, I had a lot of misdirected anger. I had a lot of uncertainty about my future, you know, what that looked like, what I was really called to do. I didn't grow up in a household where I necessarily grew up to cultivating gifts and recognizing what gifts I had and cultivating that, which fast forward now I've learned that, because with my daughter, who's 24, I was 19, 20 when I had her. So we pretty much kind of grew up together in a sense, where my children are 14 years apart. So my son now, I'm able to give to him and to her on different sides of the spectrum, you know, things that I didn't have. So now I'm recognizing their gifts and I'm cultivating those things. And even for my daughter, even as a youth, you know, recognizing that she was a writer, recognizing that she was a speaker. So her fast forward going on to PR and marketing, like it fits, it makes sense. And so, and it's a little hard to do when you're in a house of turmoil. So fast forward from my youth, I was raised in a very stable environment, very quiet home, but I just didn't have that guidance, so to speak. And so not having certain guidance and certain things, or not listening a lot of times too, thinking I knew it all, led me down a path of kind of searching and looking for love in all the wrong places, which ultimately ended up in some relationships that were not for me. And the last relationship, which was my, you know, marriage, where my story comes from, was just one that literally could have taken me and my children out, you know, from a spiritual, emotional, psychological standpoint. You know, it was a lot to deal with.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing even up until this point. that, like you said, the very value and just the importance of having that direction and that guidance.
Mhm.
So I feel like too often, I mean, I definitely didn't hear, like, of course, that your parents were doing anything, or, especially your mother, like doing anything wrong. I mean, she was out there working, doing her
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
taking care of, in the best way possible. But it's just hard because children, I mean, they really are, they take so much in, what I mean? They're very like impressionable. They also like, are also very sensitive, what I mean, at those points.
Mhm.
They just, and they really, that is why they need as much, like you said, not only guidance, but also advice as they need.
Mhm.
They need as much support as possible. Like they need
Yes.
all that, like all that comfort.
Yeah, you really have to meet the youth where they're at,
Correct. Oh
Mhm.
no, I totally agree. And I
Mhm.
just feel like, they're trying to cultivate like their environment. Right now they don't know, they're trying
Yes.
to figure it out. So they're
Yes.
seeking others to help them either validate what they are curious about, or,
Yes.
To answer those questions that maybe they have.
Yes. Yes.
And I definitely, and so I appreciate that you lifted that up, and that you still see that like parallel now, like with you being a
Mhm.
parent, and like how those gaps that maybe you also have that you're trying to now fill, for your
Yes.
children also. So I love that you definitely mentioned that. But as you mentioned, and I don't want you to share, I want you to share what you're comfortable sharing about it,
Mhm.
but you did allude to that eventually this did lead you to a path to an unhealthy relationship, is what I'm hearing.
Mhm.
And of course, we know that you are now on the other side of that, but I'm curious as to, what that relationship looked like, how it went, and just, anything you're willing to share.
Um, it was a lot of which a lot of abusive relationships are rooted in power and control. So oftentimes when people hear the word or hear the words domestic violence, they automatically assume that it was physical. And there were times that it did get physical, but a lot of it was what I like to call the mental gymnastics, the emotional, the psychological abuse, the control, controlling what we attempting and even being successful in controlling what we wore, what we ate, where we went. Just putting my children in danger, from snatching my son in front of a courthouse and, being gone to protective orders. I mean, it was a lot. The financial abuse, taking money out of bank accounts, preventing me from being able to leave. I remember when I finally got the courage to get help and say, okay, I can't do this on my own. I lacked a lot of resources, but at the time I was living out in California, and I lived across the street from Santa Monica police chief. And so I was able to one day get up the nerves and the courage to tell her my story and what I was dealing with. And she pointed me to resources that ultimately were very vital in helping to set me free. But it was a lot. It was a journey for sure. And just the things that I went through, from, living in and out of hotels. I mean, parts of my story that I've never even shared with anybody, and even sharing now with you, it was a lot because people automatically assume, why don't you just leave? Well, it's not always that easy. And in my situation, it wasn't that easy. I mean, this was a person who was displaying a lot of mental illness, and so a lot of craziness, in terms of, this person was big into IT, so he was able to hack into my emails. He was able to hire private detectives to follow me, so it was a lot of different things that ultimately created a lot of fear and intimidation in me, because I was worried about retaliation. I was worried about, all the things that prior to getting into this relationship, this marriage, I had acquired and worked very hard and was very successful in my career, financially, credit wise. And so you're faced with all those things. My credit is going to go to, we've got joint things together. So you're trying to ultimately, what would I say? I would say for many years, I was trying to avoid the collapse, the great fall. But for as long as I stayed in it, everything that I wanted to avoid in terms of credit and my safety and everything ended up coming to a head, and all the very things that I was trying to avoid ended up happening. We ended up losing our home. We ended up, going into debt. We, so many things that happened. I ended up having to take my kids out of school or change, relocate. And it was just a lot. And even with the certain orders and protective measures in place, because of the mental instability of this individual, they still violated the order. So then now you're faced with, you know, dealing with kind of some of the pushbacks when it comes to the legal system and how much they can ultimately. Protective orders is just a piece of paper that doesn't really stop anybody, you know, if they want to get to you. And so it was a lot, you know, but I'm so thankful, which is why I'm powered to be the advocate that I am, because I know that it took a lot of resources and advocacy in place to help free me and my family. And so when I realized what I had gone through, and just even trying to imagine another family, another mother, another father, or children going through what I had gone through, was enough to fuel me for my purpose to say, I want to be able to help individuals to be free, you know, and I want to, you know, that's really where it started for me. I remember I think it was my 40th birthday. Now I'm telling on myself my age, but I remember it was my 40th birthday and I was standing in the mirror and, you know, I just didn't recognize myself. You know, I had been so, to me, broken down emotionally and even physically, because I started to have a lot of health issues because of the stress. And so when I looked at myself, I said, you know, I'm a very spiritual person. So I'm just standing in the mirror and I'm like, God, I don't even recognize myself. Like, you know, this is too much, you know, to bear for my children, for me, you know, and I just want to be free. I just want to be free to fly. And so actually that's where the name of the company came from, because I really started to really resonate with the whole metamorphosis process of the caterpillar and the butterfly. And ultimately, you know, so that's where we are today. But it was a lot to get through and to go through being in it. And even a lot of times a great fear for survivors is the post-abuse situation. So post-separation. So I had a lot of post-separation abuse, from stalking to harassing phone calls to, you know, getting mail tampering, phone tampering. I mean, it was a lot. And so the fact that I'm still standing and I have dedicated my life to to helping others is a great testament of ultimately what I went through. I heard somebody say recently, where your greatest misery is your greatest ministry. And so that's how I got to where I am today, because I realized that there was a purpose in me going through all of it, and I wanted to give back and help others.
Definitely can't agree more. And not only do I appreciate, by the way, you know, you sharing, but it's interesting that you use the word stalking, because the minute you first said what was happening and how this person had the ability to, you know, infiltrate like IT wise and, you know, being able to do things, I already immediately, you know, made that connection. And I was like, wow, so stalking, which we also don't realize is also a very sophisticated, you know, form of interpersonal violence. And so it can take on many forms, whether that's digitally, you know, whether that is in person, you know, or wherever it may be. So, you know, I was definitely thinking about that, but it's just, man, because as you mentioned, I agree with you that it certainly was a lot. I also agree with you that it was certainly, you know, a big test that also became part of your testimony, as you said. So like definitely, you know, tested beyond measure, but it's definitely part of, you know, exactly what you said, the misery turning into ministry, test turning into testimony. So absolutely. But I definitely feel that, yeah, it is. I think that I'm glad that you're shedding light on the fact that when it comes to interpersonal violence, you don't have to see it. You absolutely don't have to see it. And and honestly, even those where it is physical, and maybe that is, you know, like the majority of where it's at, there's still emotional scars that, once again, people don't see that come with that physical pain, let alone if it's not physical, which for some it's not, and it doesn't have to be, because your mind is powerful. I mean, we literally use our minds, you know, every day to get up, to literally control our bodies, but also our thoughts and the way we see ourselves and the way we perceive things and the way we perceive our place in the world. So when that's like, you know, influence negatively, yeah, that absolutely has a powerful impact on how you move and how, you know, you see yourself. And so, and it can be very crippling. So what I also really appreciate about what you said is, absolutely, I'm going to definitely echo that. If there are anybody out there who still doubts, first of all, the presence of interpersonal violence or the reason why we're having conversations about them, well, I hope once again that this helps you to see why we're talking about it. But number two, if you're questioning why, yes, like individuals would, why didn't you just call 911 the first time? Why didn't you just leave that first day? Why didn't you just, all of those things? It's never an easy decision. You absolutely, and also a part of you, there was something that attracted you to the person in the first place. You kind of are hoping that this isn't just who they are, and that hopefully this is just something difficult that we're going to get through together. If you happen to also have kids with the person, I mean, that only further complicates it, because you also are no longer thinking about just yourself, but you have to think about, well, do I really want to leave this person and then now have to call, provide this broken household to my child, who obviously also loves their parent, and I don't want them to think or blame me and then take it out on me that they're no longer with. So like you have all these things. So no, it's absolutely never an easy decision. And no, I would never want to hear that said, but I'm very glad that, you also said it, and that, you provide this, imagery of why this is so important. It's for individuals like yourself, who clearly you're a wonderful person. You're over here literally helping others. And, with everything you have left in you, you're giving it to everyone else. So, I mean, clearly, but it's definitely something that nobody deserves, no matter what. And so, especially someone like yourself, who literally would give, clothes on your back to someone.
Yeah.
But it's just incredibly unfortunate, because it's the individual who was exhibiting all of those things and did it in such creative ways.
Oh, yes.
So, exactly.
That's where I say the mental gymnastic, because you don't know when you're in the spin of it. It's like kind of the web of deception and deceit. And I love how you beautifully articulated it. And I love the show. I really am so thankful that you guys have created this platform for survivors to share their story, because it only helps individuals who are, like you said, because I learned domestic violence only thrives in silence. So what we don't, old school, my mom used to say, closed mouth doesn't get fed, so if we need help, we have to learn to be able to know that there are platforms and places that are safe enough that we can get help. But something else that you said that I really like is, that looking at the safety of it all, looking at all the things that you have to try. Like, I'm a working professional. At one point I was in school. I'm trying to get my daughter through school. Like, there's all these things. And ultimately, that is not the person, the man that I thought that I married. Right. Amen. So it's kind of like wolves in sheep clothing, where I thought I was presented with a representative of something. So when you do find out, there's like they said, there's different stages of grief. There's the denial, there's the shock, there's the, oh my God. And I remember so many times asking myself questions like, how did I get here? How did I end up? How did I not see this? So you go through a shame and blame portion of your life too, when you're in that, just like you said, but also considering the kids. How will this affect the children? Having a broken home. For me, because I felt like I waited to get married. I felt like I had selected the right person. So now there's that grave disappointment of like, wow, so this means that, there's no knight in shining armor. And so I had to address a lot of false narratives of what I thought marriage should look like, because I remember early on when I did share with a family member, one of the first advice that they gave me was, well, you got in the boat with them, you just got to ride it out. But that's not true. You don't have to stay, And so when I think about even looking back over the history of my family, and my grandmother, who was in it for 40 years, never got out, never, and literally lost her mind to a sense. She was diagnosed later on, very early on, manic depressive schizophrenic, because of the trauma, because of the abuse. And hers was more physical abuse. But, fast forward to the, the 20th century, we have so many resources and things out there that we don't have to stay in a situation that is bad for us. And the biggest thing, so there's that survivor side of, okay, well, how does this look, to my children, to, you're worried about how it looks to society. You're worried about how it looks to your family and friends who thought, oh, this was the ideal marriage. There's so many different things that you go through and why survivors stay. So I never asked that question. But I also learned a lot about myself through the process. So while I wouldn't want to relive what I went through, I probably really wouldn't change anything about it, because I learned so much about myself, which landed me to where I am today. I had, like I said, face the false narratives of what I thought a family looked like, what I thought healthy images. I had to face my own childhood trauma and things that I hadn't dealt with, and why I was looking for love in the wrong places, and why I overlooked things. I remember, and I have a workshop that talks about this, but I remember many people asking me, well, didn't you see the red flags? Did you see anything before you got into this situation with this person? And when I look back over it, there weren't necessarily red flags, but I believe that there are white and pink flags before it ever turns red. So there were things that I did see, but I thought, oh, these aren't necessarily red flags. There are something to pay attention to, but we can get help for this, and ultimately even the manipulation, the manipulative mind of the abuser, who says, no, we need to bond with our trauma. There's something called trauma bonding. We need to, it's not me, it's you. We both need help. So you got the whole, like I said, the mental gymnastics of things of, and we went through counselors. I tried very hard to save my marriage, and I didn't, I did love my husband. And I thought that I had met my soulmate, so to speak. So all of those things. And then when you go through a divorce and you go through that post-separation, it's literally like experiencing a death. They say that divorce can be like a death. And so adding just divorce, but adding trauma, adding stalking, adding all of the different things, it was a lot.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I feel like if that doesn't, capture it enough, I just, like, I totally agree. And it is. And I think it's also just, and like we mentioned, nobody prepares for this. Nobody goes into it like, oh yeah, it's going to end eventually. And so I'll just need to get ready for that when it comes. No, we want it to last forever. We want it to be be done. So, we all, crave for that companionship in that way. So no, I can agree more. And then speaking of resources, what I also wanted to highlight was that shout out to the officer that actually helped you out and pointed you in the direction of resources, because I will say, now there have been other, individuals in law enforcement, and they have not always had that like foresight. And, sometimes they have also been part of the trauma as well. Like they have, re-traumatized individuals because they did not have the proper background, did not have the proper training. So I love to hear that in this case, this individual, had access and then provided that to you, like connected the dots for you, helped you go in the right direction. So I'm just really glad. And that's all I hope to see more of. I also agree that I know it's a difficult conversation. We talk about law enforcement in our country and some of the, problematic things that have happened. I'm definitely a fan of, I'm okay with them being here just as long as they have that training and can do that. Because I agree, like in your case, that's exactly what you wanted. You were seeking help. And I'm just glad that that's what you got, and instead of it being somebody blaming you, or like you said, asking those questions that we should not ask. Like, well, why did you wait so long? Or why did you not, leave sooner? All of those things. So I'm very glad. And that's what I want to hear about now. So I'm curious about, as you were leaving, and so leaving the post behind, what were those things that helped the most to get you to the other side where you were finally able to heal and, do better? What helped you the most? And, what are some things that you still use today?
Well, I call my advocates that I use, and I ended up finding through resources, through calling 211 and just knocking doors and calling, because what I found was it was a lot of work, but what I found was if I called one resource, maybe they weren't able to help me, but they were able to lead me, it's kind of like the step system, and they were kind of able to lead me to another avenue, another resource that potentially could help me. So ultimately I had a lot of great advocates in place that not only heard my story, but they believed my story. And to my vindication, when we were in court and just going through the whole legal process, a leopard doesn't change its spots. You know what I'm saying? So ultimately, they were able to see for themselves who this individual was, because, whether he would do something in court or whether he would, it was just always something that he did that they were like, oh my God, this is really, happening. But I think the biggest thing for me was education, because you don't know, knowledge is power. And so I remember going to, from the chief of police who connected me with the domestic violence agency, who connected me, I ended up getting to an attorney. And I remember that attorney was for a domestic violence agency. She showed me the wheel of abuse. I had never seen that. And so when I saw that, and I saw that I was every pie on that chart was eye-opening. So I will say knowledge is power. People don't know what they don't know. And so if all you've seen in your family is, you know, certain forms of dysfunction, or, you know, people enabling bad behavior, or saying, you know, it's okay, or going back, you don't necessarily grow up knowing, you know, right from wrong. But you also, I grew up very empathetic, and I have a very empathetic family. And so we grew up, you know, with a huge measure of grace, of just, you know, well, we just forgive and we keep moving on. Well, no, you know, hurting people hurt people, and that becomes, that can become the detriment of someone's life. You know, we see a lot of people who don't make it out, that they literally have lost their lives. And so I would say education, number one, and just talking. You know, for me, I had a lot of family and friends that said, well, you never said anything. You didn't, you know, and I will be honest with you, again, I'm a very spiritual person. For what I was going through, I could not afford. I've been blessed to have a huge community of friends and supporters that support me and love me and will go to bat for me. But I didn't need that rah-rah go to bat for me. You know what I mean? I needed people who had sound judgment, who had knowledge of situations like this, and who could give me some true sound spiritual wisdom and advice. And nothing against those people that couldn't, but I had to use wisdom and discernment on who I shared my story with, because me talking on the phone with a friend and it turned into gossip, or it turning into, well, you know, I would just do, I didn't have space for that, because I literally was in a life or death situation, and I needed to get out, and I needed to get my children out. So I would say learning to talk to the right people, and just, I watched videos, YouTube, movies. I remember watching the movie, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, Invisible Man. And it's the, you know, I was like, oh my God, this is my story right here. You know what I'm saying? Like, I literally had to, I had to keep records. And I will say that to people: document. And I was documenting before I learned, you know, in my, you know, education that I was gaining, was to document. And documentation is what literally saved my life, because when you're dealing with a nefarious individual who's used to playing these mind games and who's used to doing this mental gymnastics, it's hard to prove. You know, it can be hard to prove, especially intimate partner, where you're not necessarily coming with the black eye or the bruises. You know, it's psychological, it's emotional, it's all those things. And so it's hard to prove those things. So documentation was very much my help, you know, was very much what got me out. Like, I remember this attorney that I speak of with the domestic violence agency led me to opened up a pro bono law firm, who ended up having six and at one point 7 people working on my case to free me. But I remember bringing into that first initial meeting a crate that I literally hid in my garage with piles of clothes and things on top of it, that literally had all of the evidence, the phone calls, the text messages, pictures, the past police reports, everything that I needed to get myself free. They already had their case right there in front of them. And so that's why I say documentation is so very important, because when you don't know how to articulate your story, or you don't, you know, sometimes with trauma, you forget things, you forget details, you know, it's a lot to it. So I'm rambling, but yeah. So education, definitely speaking out, and asking, not being afraid to ask for help from the right people.
Oh, absolutely. And no such thing as rambling on the show. Sorry. It was
Okay.
actually so good. I was so
Okay,
into it. Trust me. I was thinking, while true, and now mind you, I also would, you know, I hate to have to say it, but I definitely want to acknowledge that it's also so unfortunate, right, that you even had to do all that. Goodness,
Yeah.
because a part of me was also thinking, like, my gosh, the fact that you even had to collect all of that. But it was amazing. Yes, I'm
Yeah.
very glad that it, you know, it helped you, and that you had the right help with you, you know,
Yeah.
and that they made use of that evidence as well, and that it
Yeah.
went in those ways. And that's why I just also think it's so difficult, our systems and just the things we have to do, first of all, like to prove, because it was basically like you're proving why you should be
Yes.
free, as
Yeah.
if that's not like a God-given right. Now, you should already be free in general, but you basically had to prove why you deserve your freedom. My goodness. Not only that, but individuals who are also been in domestic violence situations, who, you know, in order to get protection orders, have to also plead their cases, sometimes in front of the person that they're trying to get the protection order from. So it's just, incredible to me, the things, the hoops that you even have to jump through at all. But I'm very glad, yes, when they go successfully and that freedom is given, but also, as you mentioned, I just think that the power of education for sure. I definitely heard that loud and clear, and it's absolutely something that I absolutely agree with, that we need to arm ourselves with that knowledge, and once we have it, we can then use it, we can, move more intentionally because we know things. And so that's why it is, I agree, like having the access to that information and then using it to then, move about in a better way. But it's also just being able to know that, yeah, once you secure that freedom and being able to move, that you absolutely take advantage of that and move on a better path, because you definitely did not deserve to be under that person's grasp and under all of those manipulative tactics that they were trying to employ on you. But it's just knowing that, and knowing that because of all that, that person made you question whether or not you should be free, like that was part of the plan. So if you now are, using whatever you can, and that's why I'm glad in this case they absolutely did not win, you were able to secure that freedom that unfortunately they were trying to threaten and take away from you ultimately. Like they just wanted you to not feel as empowered as you are. So I'm just glad that they didn't win. And so, they may have tried, but absolutely not. And I hope others understand that you deserve that also. So, if there's anybody trying to take away that freedom from you, no, we all deserve absolutely happiness, health, but absolutely freedom. No, you should not feel like you're chained down in whatever relationship you're in. That's not the point. So, yeah.
And I share with my children and even for my son, like people have arguments or disagreements. It's a matter of how we disagree. When it gets to violence and it gets to, I remember at times where my ex would take my car keys so I couldn't leave the house, or when it gets to confinement, or, saying words that, because words hurt, we have the power, our tongue is very powerful. We have the power to build up or tear down. And I'm not saying that I haven't fallen, like I haven't misused my words before either. But the point is, I had to teach my children, like people have disagreements, and I had to understand them, because I had in that relationship, the agreements, the disagreements would turn into a whole dysfunctional thing. So there's a difference between healthy banter, and dysfunctional banter. And so that was one of the things. And then also for survivors to understand, like, it's a lot when you deal with the post-separation. So now you have the kids. I took my kids to therapy. I immediately got in therapy, but then you have the discrediting, because now the abuser is upset that you left. So now you have him, for me, I had him discrediting my story, trying to discredit me as a parent, trying to, give a different narrative of what happened, and thankfully, again, my community of people, support and friends that I have, they knew me and they knew something was off, and they knew the stories that ultimately he was sharing. It didn't quite add up with who I was, and so it just was a lot to even put it in light words. It was a lot, and I think the biggest thing for survivors or people that are going through that is a lack of resources. If you have someone that ultimately is controlling the money or the breadwinner, you don't have the resources, and it takes a lot, because I know in the very beginning, because, when I talk about the success of my story, that happened through years. On average, it takes a survivor, a victim 7 to 10 times to leave. I was on time number 7. And so when we think about the resources that even he used to fight against me when I tried to self-represent myself, that didn't go well for me, because here he's hiring 10, 15, $20,000 attorneys to fight against me. And I don't know the laws. I don't know, the different things. And so it definitely was a learning experience that I do not want to go through, but I'm better for it in the sense that I'm able to help now my clients and even future clients and people understand kind of what they need and what they need to prepare for when going through something like this.
Absolutely. And move away from, the red flags to the green flags. Because that's the other thing. There are some healthy flags out there, y'all. We just gotta find them, and recognize those also. So that's why I love that you made the distinction between, between the healthy and unhealthy and what that looks like. you know, and
Yes.
all that. But that is a beautiful transition to my next question, because I was
Mhm.
going to ask, knowing that, you know, you do educate on those things, and not only, you know, to others, but to your beautiful children. So I
Thank
love
you.
that, you know, you provide that, and you provide that wonderful education, and, you know, help others to gain that insight that maybe they are not getting elsewhere. I'm curious about that world. And so, and I do believe there, in the midst of that, there was a relocation, I believe you said too. So
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm not sure if it was because of the relationship that you eventually relocated over here, but I know now that you're in Texas, you've been doing all this wonderful work. So like the educating and the workshops, so I'm, you know, curious what that world looks like. What are
Mhm.
the things, you know, you do, and just, you know, more about that.
Well, ultimately, my company is Be Free to Fly International. So I
Oh,
started my company in California.
okay.
And I would have still been in California if it wasn't for the post-separation abuse. So I ended up, as I said earlier in the show, me and my children ended up losing our home. And so I actually ended up going into shelter, a domestic violence shelter and transitional housing, which, you know, these again were things that I was trying to avoid, but in the end, these were things that were very helpful for my journey and eye-opening, because the organization that helped us, that got us into transitional housing and into shelter, it was amazing. And the experience was not anything like what I thought, because I was going off the Lifetime movies, right? So, you know, it was kind of, you know, it was like kind of traumatic. I was traumatizing myself before I even got to that point, but it actually ended up being a blessing in disguise. But ultimately what happened, again, when we talk about, you know, the orders being just a piece of paper, if somebody wants to come at you or find you, they can. And so ultimately what ended up happening was my abuser found out where I was. And so started stalking. They saw him on the grounds of their office and so they got, you know, when that happens with survivors, you have to relocate. You have to leave that place. And so what they ultimately wanted me to do was to go into another shelter, you know, that was miles away. And I didn't want to do that. I had family in Texas. Ultimately, that's where me and my previous partner, where we had both relocated from, which also talks, you know, we can talk about that, how abuser will move you away from your family and friends to isolate you. And so that's what California was, you know, that was moving us away out of that environment to isolate and to further, you know, um, do the abuse. But so ultimately, I needed my village. A village is very important. I talk to people about this all the time. Everybody needs a village, whether that's blood relation village or just family and friends and community, or friends and community that you have established. But my community, my village was here. And so I needed help with my son, and I needed, you know, ultimately when you go through all the things that I went through and all the things that my children went through, is literally like coming out of war, you know. So there are some remnants of PTSD. There are some remnants of, you know, triggers. I have a chapter in my book called Trigger Trauma and Anger, you know, and so there's different things that I had to work through, that I needed a support system around me, because being mentally well and mentally sound for not only my children, but for myself was very important. So being around my village was what brought me to Texas. So in answering your question, you know, I started in California and I still have my organization in California. That's my, you know, the parent company. And then I have, you know, my sister, you know, the sister company here in Texas, but then I've also now started a nonprofit here in Texas as well. So I go back and forth. Like I've done a couple of speaking. I've had the opportunity to give back in California to some organizations, one that helped me. And so I've been able to speak and share my story with their organization, but then also just be a part of like survivor support groups and things, and focus groups. So being able to share that way as well. So my company, ultimately, the vision is to be worldwide, and thanks to the pandemic, you know, there's the pros and the cons, but the pros of the pandemic is that we can be virtual. So I'm able to offer workshops. I'm able to offer life coaching in the virtual world, and also travel, you know, to wherever I'm needed to speak or to share. So, so yeah, so that's how I operate in a nutshell.
Oh, wow. So yeah, so definitely very, and I'm glad, you know, you share that that's, you know, ultimately what led to all of that. But in the process, now you have roots, you know, in multiple places, you know,
Yes.
and able to help multiple audiences.
And
So
I
I,
was born in California. So ultimately, it's kind of, you know, when I talk about the story of our greatest misery becomes our ministry, and how I had to I had to do a lot of work and self-discovery work, which is where the life coaching comes from, because that's where I really focus with my clients, that discovery process. But when I looked at it, when I was in California, living in even Long Beach, that's where I was born. So it's kind of like a full circle moment where I literally, when we talk about the metamorphosis, I literally went back to that place where ultimately it started, in my, me being who I am. And so
Right.
it's interesting how life has circles and how we can kind of come back to ourselves, but all for growth and transformation. So.
Oh, you know it. Definitely, definitely. Love that. And so, and with that being said, I'm also curious, so what are some of these wonderful workshops that you offer? What are some of these great, topics that you touch on? It definitely sounds like there's, great work that's being done. So I'm curious, what do they entail?
So I have intervention and prevention workshops. So one, the awareness workshops, so that's where we talk about the pink, white, and red, or the white, pink, and red flags. So the dangers of dating a dangerous person and what those signs look like. So I'm able to, in my workshop, able to share parts of my story, but also the education that I have, that I've been working hard to, then the knowledge that I've been working hard to get over the years. So it's a collection of my story, but also other survivor stories, and just kind of being able to help people bring awareness to what a dangerous situation looks like. And then I also have dating awareness for teens, because, it starts early, it can start early. And so that those are the awareness of workshops. And then I also do self-care. So what we need to pour back into ourselves. So the power of self-care. And then I'm a big journaler, and again, this is another thing when we talk about documenting, this is what saved my life. So the power of journaling is so important. So I share about journaling. I have a journaling workshop and just kind of what that looks like. And then also parenting workshops, because I'm a parent first, like at the end of the day, like my decision I could have stayed in it, but my decision really came from looking at my children. Did I want my daughter to be abused or become an abuser? Did I want my son to become, because I had a conversation recently with another survivor that we have a duty to society to make sure that our children are well. Because if we don't, then we're ultimately pushing them into society to perpetuate the same behaviors that ultimately happened in the home, that ultimately of dysfunction. And so, so I have parenting workshops. I have one that's about generational parenting with purpose, generational healing. So talking about the prenatal and postnatal effects of trauma and how we can be free and how we can raise healthy and whole individuals. And then I have another partner that I life coach with who also shares about parenting from a special needs perspective, because when we deal with trauma and we deal with what happens in the womb, because trauma happens in the womb a lot of times for people that are pregnant. So when we talk about, and I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but when we talk about autism, we talk about, ADHD, just the different things that our children can affect that can ultimately happen in the womb and outside of the womb, like being able to work with parents and work with children that have special needs. I do a lot of training and workshops with Health and Human Services with the disability and the IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I look at all those things, the effect that trauma has on children. So I'm very passionate. So those are the workshops. I also speak and I share about my personal memoir, which is a self-help book of the steps and things that I did to free myself and what I went through, the spiritual journey. It's not about my ex, it's about my journey, because at the end of the day, it's what we make of our situations, what we turn that into, and what that looks like for us. What did we learn? And so that's what that book is about. And then I also have creative merchandise. So I started, a hobby of just kind of making bracelets, but it's turned into, which again speaks to the international side, where I'm selling bracelets and people are buying them from all over, so, but it's health and healing is the message for the bracelet. I don't make one bracelet alike. I make them all just as we are created, beautifully unique and individual. So these are all things that helped me get through, what I went through, what I
Yeah,
went through.
absolutely.
And so that's my company in a nutshell. It's the workshops, it's the self-help memoir, it's the creative merchandise and the speaking and life coaching. Of course, life coaching is the most valuable to me because I want to help survivors, but not only survivors of domestic violence, but there are people that have gone through, grief and depression and loss. In the pandemic, we saw a lot of loss that ultimately affected people's mental. And so being able to help people rebuild, reclaim, and restore their lives is really my passion and the heart of Be Free to Fly.
Oh, absolutely. Which love to hear. And so there's definitely like so many, wonderful things that are there. And so I'm glad you shared because definitely like there's so much that individuals can connect with and definitely can resonate with and, hopefully be a part of. So I definitely love that. But you touched on the other thing that I wanted to ask, which is that with parenting. And so I am curious, like what has been biggest lesson, biggest takeaway with parenting? I mean, so far, obviously, since it's a lifetime commitment, but the biggest thing or like maybe, something that's touched you or just, how you would talk about parenting and what it's been like with your children.
Well, I'm a big advocate of counseling. And so therapy is like key. And we're in a day and age where mental wellness is not taboo and therapy is not taboo anymore. So we're talking about it, we're having conversations. So the biggest thing for me with me and my children was conversation. And so really starting the therapy really started at home. So what could I share with my children about what I was personally going through and also listening to their hearts of what they went through, because trauma is different for everybody and it affects people different. And you can't tell one person what's traumatic to them may not be traumatic to someone else. And so being able to listen to my children and hear them at the heart and core of what they also saw through their own eyes and what they were experiencing and the help that they needed. So that was a big thing for me, was talking at home. And I remember a counselor telling me when we were preparing to relocate, and I'm like, oh, I need a counselor for my son. And she was like, the counseling, you're the counselor. You have all the tools, the resources, the education. So don't worry. I mean, definitely try to find, a counselor when you can, but remember that you have everything inside to be able to give your son what he needs. So so again, talking at home, doing the therapy, but also doing activities, making sure, that I create a safe space where they can share and they feel comfortable to share. And even the touchy parts, the parts that I played, because we don't come with parenting doesn't come with a manual. So there's mistakes that I made in the process of raising them. So them being able to share openly and candidly about, things that I may have done that have affected them and been a part of this journey. So that's a big thing is, like I said, is therapy and having open, honest conversations. What we like to call around here healing conversations, because the more we share, the more we can heal. And the more we heal, the more we can go out and share with others how to heal and how to be well.
Absolutely. And just grow too, like in a healthy
Yes.
way, and
Yes.
develop as individuals. So I feel like we can't do that enough, but agree, we don't always have that space. So just
Yeah.
providing that space, providing that platform and that opportunity it's definitely wonderful to hear and something I definitely resonate with, but it's just amazing that that's something that, you share with them and that you do. So, definitely thank you for that. And so with that, I'm also curious, are there any future plans? I mean, I know you've shared what you're already doing, but
Yeah.
any plans for the future, other things that you would like to do?
The blueprint, as I call it, is big.
Awesome.
It definitely speaks to the international. So, I'm always looking for people to join and help, and I collaborate with different individuals to help share the vision and to get the vision out there and ultimately fulfill the mission. But yes, I want to one day have a show, a podcast. I want to, start to work on my YouTube channel. But the biggest thing is I really want to have transitional housing. That's one of my big goals. Is I remember what it was like to lose my home and to feel like, and especially, I came from LA, and that's like the homeless capital. So that was very, very scary when you go down to Skid Row and you see all these thousands of people and you think that could potentially be you. And so I understand the power of housing and having a stable, being able to have a stable environment. So definitely the transitional housing is a big one for me. And also just building the life coaching practice, really building recovery life coaching to be able to add more life coaches to my team, because it takes a village, even in this world of advocacy, even in this world of social justice and social work. It really does take a village. I cannot do it all by myself. And I know that God didn't give me the vision to do it all by myself. So those are just some of the things that I plan to roll out within the coming years. So.
Oh, awesome.
And I have a couple of other books in me. So I'm also working on a couple of book projects as well.
Lovely. Oh yeah, we didn't get to touch too much, but I mean, obviously we heard the memoir and all of that. But yeah, that's just so great to hear that you also have that. But that's right. So some of books, what are the ones that you've already made and that you're hoping to touch on in the future?
So I have Good Mourning, Nude, which is the personal memoir of sharing my story. But then I also have another book that I'm looking to do, a collaboration of other survivors and their stories, and kind of just sharing a broader light, not just my story, but understanding there are others out there that have a story just like mine, may not be the same situation, but they do have a story. And I believe everybody has a story. So just helping these women and men, individuals, because domestic violence does happen to men as well, be able to share their stories. So that, and then I also have, I'd like to create a workbook for that book as well. And also a workbook for the personal memoir that I published a couple of years ago.
Look at that. Awesome. So
Yeah.
much to come.
Yes.
So I love that. Definitely love to hear that. So with that, I mean, it's already been more, than a pleasure, but now I just want to give space to, if there's any individuals that want to connect with you, learn more from you, work with you, whatever it is, like all of those great things you mentioned, how can individuals find you, find your work, find your books, all those things?
Well, it's funny that, I created this background barrier to kind of just blot out my background, but if anybody can see this square, I don't know if it works from where we are, but the square will definitely take you to the website. Will also take you to the booking tabs and how to book me for either life coaching, consultation sessions, or workshops or speaking engagements. But the best way to get in contact with me, I am on Instagram as the Be Free to Fly handle. But the best way to get into contact with me, I would say, is you can either email me at info@befree2fly, and B, as you see in the background, is B by itself. So befree2flyinternational.org. Or if you want to check out my website, you can also contact me through my website at www.befree2flyinternational.org.
Wonderful. So yes, as you heard it, there are multiple ways. Definitely use the QR code, but if you can't use that, then definitely y'all heard the other ways that you can. So with that, I mean, it's definitely been, I've learned so much, I've gained so much, and I'm sure, but also hopeful that others have as well. But with that, I also would like to, give you space. Is there anything else you want to share with our viewers? Anything else you wanted to uplift? Anything else you have?
Well, one, thank you. And thank you for this platform, this show, because I believe that it's very powerful and impactful. And I definitely will help to share it with others in my community and survivors that I work with. And I just want to say to those that are out there listening that you're never stuck. There's always a way out. In that, again, domestic violence, intimate partner abuse, any type of abuse that you may be experiencing, it only thrives in silence. And so a lot of times we allow fear, we allow shame and blame to keep us, parts that we may have played, we don't want people to know about, mistakes that we've made, and that there's always a way of escape. And sometimes we have to create that way of escape for ourselves, and just know that it will take work, but you can do it and you can be free to fly. So.
Oh, see, that was too perfect.
I didn't even expect that, but it just came.
Exactly. And see, that's why I don't want to ruin it, y'all. So y'all heard it here. You got to be free to fly and do what you can to, not let anything get in that way. So with that, we thank you so very much. It has been nothing but a pleasure having you. Thank you again for taking the time, but also thank y'all for tuning in. So y'all heard it. Please connect, because I definitely feel like there's so much that you can gain. So thank you.
Thank you.